Hey there, Paul Matadine with indieJourno.com. I wanted to tell you about two recent studies that the International Center for Science and Drug Policy put out about cannabis use. They say that they want to set the record straight both about the positives and negatives about cannabis use, which they say right now is kind of mixed up. I spoke to a spokesperson, and what came to mind immediately was all the claims about prolonged use causing mental health issues.
There has been a link in the literature between greater schizophrenic risk and cannabis use. However, it has not been proven that the schizophrenic risk increased because of the cannabis use. And there's actually a lot of other theories, like, for example, that individuals suffering from schizophrenic symptoms use cannabis to sort of self-medicate and deal with those symptoms.
Nazli Matsuri also told me that the popular notion that using cannabis is going to lower your IQ is simply not true.
It's only based on one study, that claim, that IQ leads to an 8-point drop. So basing anything on one study is way too small of a sample size. So many of our claims do assert that more research is needed, but given the existing evidence, the way that these claims are currently said is misrepresenting what we know.
Ultimately, she says that a lot of the negatives you hear about cannabis need to be taken with a grain of salt.
I would say that the problems are just greatly overblown. The extent to which they're often overstated, the way the claims are said, they're often overstating the evidence or pointing to evidence that really is outdated and not really up to the rigor for the way that they are repeated.
Another topic I wanted to bring up was that issue of a gateway drug, that cannabis often leads to something much worse.
One of the most consistent trends that you see in the literature is that the use of so-called harder drugs, so things like cocaine or heroin, are often preceded by the use of marijuana. But this in no way tells us that the marijuana use is what led to the use of those harder drugs. And in fact, when you actually zoom out and look at a lot of countries around the world, other drugs preceded marijuana use or are just more strongly associated with the use of harder drugs. So in some countries, you see tobacco use more strongly associated. So in a way, tobacco would be considered the gateway drug. Alcohol, same thing, the gateway drug. But really, the gateway phenomenon is just a misinterpretation of the scientific evidence coming down to correlation and causation. There's many other reasons that scientists have looked at or considered when it comes to this, such as the fact that currently, under prohibition, all of the illicit drugs are sold in the same market. So your drug dealer that you're buying your cannabis from, you can often also buy your cocaine from. You can also buy your heroin from.
One thing's pretty clear, there's a lot of information out there about cannabis and a lot of opinions about that information. I will put a link to the center's findings on our website, so check it out, indieJourno.com.